Hello YouTube, hope you're having a great day today. Today I want to take a look at one of the more famous authors in sort of the science fiction and fantasy genre named Poul Anderson. We'll be taking a look at one of his seminal works today, 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, which is pretty good. He's also a writer who's written a lot of stuff. A lot of writers out there have wrote for most of their career, and they wrote hundreds and hundreds of short stories, novellas, novels and such, and Poul Anderson's one of those who wrote a lot of different things. He's one of the most award-winning authors in the genre. He has 7 Hugos and 3 Nebulas. Very few writers have as many awards as he does. His stuff was very influential, and he wrote a lot of different things over the course of time. We're going to be taking a look today at my favorite work of his, which is one of the most influential works in fantasy coming out of the 50s and 60s. So let's take a look at it. Poul Anderson, again, is one of the sort of writers. He loved the genre. He's from, initially from Scandinavia, and then lived kind of in the American Midwest. So he writes a lot of sort of things that kind of had that kind of a Scandinavian feel to them. 3 Hearts and 3 Lions definitely has that sort of a Scandinavian old school, old culture, old world feel to it, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And again, this is a man who has written a lot of different things and across the genres. Tales of the Flying Mountains, which is set in the future, in our solar system. The Broken Sword, which is another fantasy story, which we'll be looking at later probably during this series. Boat of a Million Years. I got like a bunch of his stuff. I only grabbed 3 or 4 books really quickly. But this is a guy who's written a lot of different stuff out there. And for that reason, he's influenced a lot of different things. His stuff has had a lot of different impacts. And a lot of things that have happened that since have come from his ideas and his sort of inspirations. So we're going to take a look at what, again, my favorite book of his, which is 3 Hearts and 3 Lions. Now this book was very influential in fantasy. It's actually listed by Gary Gygax as one of his key books in his Appendix N, where he talks about key influences in Dungeons & Dragons. And this is one of the places where this sort of law versus chaos concept of its central sort of theme is going to come from. And the law versus chaos is sort of the central theme of a lot of works that are being written in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, particularly in the mid-60s and 70s. Michael Moorcock's Elrock series and others, heavily law versus chaos. It's also in Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber, law versus chaos. Poul Anderson's 3 Hearts and 3 Lions is probably one of the best examples of law versus chaos and such. So let's take a little bit of a look at the novel, what it does, and then where some of its influences come from, and why people still read it today. So 3 Hearts and 3 Lions was originally written as a novella in 53. It was rewritten as a novel, which was published in 61. We're going to be reviewing the novel version of that here. So basically, and again, I try to keep these mostly spoiler-free. I'm only going to give you things from the first couple of chapters, and then a basic overview of the story, and then leave you to it. If you're interested in it, I don't want to spoil anything for you, trust me. Even if something is from the 50s or 60s, my reviews are going to tend to be spoiler-free. So it's set during the World War II era. The Nazis are invading Denmark. There are a number of soldiers there who are trying to keep a famous German scientist, who ends up being Niels Bohr, from escaping the Nazi control and bringing him into the Danish territory. And the Nazis are following him. One of the soldiers there is going to get shot by a gun, and when he's shot, he's actually going to get sent to this alternate universe where he's still kind of in Europe, but he's now more in this old school Middle Ages Europe, where he's going to be speaking more classic France and so forth. And there's going to be this charger horse and this shield with the crest of three lions and 3 hearts on it. He's going to be able to, the armor fits perfectly, the horse, he knows how to ride, he can speak the local languages very well, and so forth. And he's in kind of this mythologized version of France, where it's basically divided into 2 halves, the chaotic half of fairy, which is ruled by this elf king, and some other stuff too, and then this sort of law side of like the traditional sort of Charlemagne style of Europe, where they speak some sort of old school French, and the law side of humans is going to be the other half. So Europe is kind of divided into these two sort of halves, chaos of fairy and the law of humans. And so order versus chaos is again the sort of central sort of thing. He's going to be joined by a dwarf and a swan maid companion. And he's also going to have, they're going to be traveling through fairy, and they're going to realize that he has some connections to previous people in the past. And then he also is trying to fight for the humans and such. He's going to grab a sword, realize that he's this old classic guy. He's going to end up helping the chaos, hurt chaos in his own world, and then he's going to go back to his home world and help kick the Nazis out, and succeed both in our world as well as in this fantasy world. So this idea of sort of this old school, old Middle Ages style of storytelling is one that was heavily influenced by a lot of sort of mythologies of the day, like Roland, the Nibelungeid, the story of the ring. You can see A Midsummer Night's Dream from Shakespeare, and many of these sort of influences in this story. It definitely takes a lot of these ideas and puts them together in sort of a modern context. Also, there's a central law versus chaos sort of dichotomy where they're two fighting against each other. And this does a very good job of that. It also sort of creates the sort of paladin class in a fantasy form. Our main character is basically a paladin. He's across a war charger or with a shield's armor. He has sort of this paladin style of things. For example, him and the swan male fall in love, but he won't consummate their love because he wants to be, he's going to be returning home to the 20th century, so he understands that he won't be able to be there for her, so he doesn't want to consummate. So there's this, he definitely is kind of this paladin-esque character, and probably heavily influenced the paladin character that would come just a few years later in Dungeons and Dragons and later on and be codified. Other things here too, like Nixies, the troll, they're fighting against the troll who regenerates. That's the first time that happened. So the modern concept of this troll that regenerates, the swan may, a lot of these things that are in this book are still in modern fantasy today through Dungeons and Dragons, video games, board games, books, and a lot of other things. So this is where a lot of those concepts are going to come from. They're going to come from this book. So this book still is very good. And I actually think this book still is a pretty solid read today. It was actually the first book I read by Poul Anderson. I came to it from Gary Gygax's Appendix N. I wanted to read a lot of the things that were heavily influential on Dungeons & Dragons. And in fact, this is not the first time, and it won't be the last time, that we actually look at a story for this channel that tries to unpack these lost classics that's going to be coming from that Appendix N list. My favorite of the Appendix N list is probably one of the first ones that I gave you, which was Sterling Lanier's Hiero's Journey, which I'll link to you below. But there's a lot of them other here too. It's great. And this is, again, early Dungeons & Dragons had a law versus chaos sort of concept to it. So this is, this feels like it's definitely kind of a proto Dungeons & Dragons story. And while I'm not a big fan of fantasy stories that take a character from the real world and kind of transport them into a fantasy world, I understand why they do it, because you're doing that as a reader, so it gives you a character who won't understand the world any more than you do as a reader. So you have somebody who you have an automatic sort of similar view of the world. So I understand why a lot of writers continue to do that. I'm not a big fan of it. It feels lazy to me, but I'd rather just be introduced to the world and move on. But I understand why they do it and why writers to this day continue to play that. In fact, the very first fantasy story I wrote when I was in 5th grade did the exact same trope. They had somebody who was jogging down the street, went through a magical portal, and ended up in a magical world. So it happens. And again, I understand that trope. I'm not a fan of it. I think it's lazy, but I understand why you do it. It helps to really quickly draw your audience in and understand the world at the same speed as your writer is. And your characters are. So I understand why it's there as that sort of a trope. Even R.A. Salvatore has done it with the Spear Will Over's Tale. So it's something or Echoes of the Fourth Magic does the same thing. So it's an ongoing sort of trope in fantasy. Poul Anderson, again, is a gifted writer. This is a very good book. It definitely sticks with me, and it led me to read a lot of his other stuff too. So if you've never heard of Poul Anderson or Three Hearts and Three Lines, check it out. You'll like it. Again, it had a lot of impact on a lot of things, so you'll see a lot of things in here like the Paladin, like the Trolls, and so forth. And again, it has this sort of mythic arc to it. It feels like it fits right into that sort of everything from the Song of Roland to the story of the Ring and the Nibelungeid and such. So there's a lot of different things in here that definitely play, I think, very well with the story. So it's a good story, and it connects well with that sort of literature. It has a literary feel to it. So this is it, and if you've read it, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'd love to engage with you more. If you want to talk about some of the spoilers and some of the points that happen, I'd also love to talk with you about it more in the things below. If you enjoyed this video, there's going to be so many more videos to come. I've planned and already recorded tons and tons of videos where I look at classics from fantasy, horror, and science fiction from the older eras that you may not have ever heard of, and we talk about them, give you a chance to take a look at them. So take a look at this video, hit that subscribe button, and hey, if you watch this video this far, man, I really appreciate that you took some time out of your day, to spend 10 or 15 minutes with me for this video. So thank you so much for your time. You have a good day.